Today, myself and Maggie would like to discuss with you civic participation as an outcome of environmental, and specifically urban agriculture education in urban schools. So before we start, I'd like just to thank thank all the team on this and collaborators on this project, starting with Marian Krasny, the director of Civic Ecology Lab, and Thad Copeland from Department of Education in New York City, who has recently connected us with so many awesome schools in New York City for this research, and other people who are mentioned on this slide who have been immensely helpful in this research. And there's also a link for you if you wanted to learn more. So how it all started, actually, the whole idea and history of this project starts 10,000 years ago, maybe, when with the invention of agriculture, we've created surplus that helped us to create cities for people to exchange goods and invent more things. But then, closer to our times, we see that cities, unfortunately, they face enormous amount of social and environmental issues. And today, maybe a couple of centuries ago, we see that urban agriculture now rejoins cities, and for different reasons. Because people want to grow food closer, they want to diminish their environmental impact, and we have an explosion of ideas recently how urban agriculture education merges educational systems and have plenty of really interesting social impacts, one of which is civic participation, which would like to explore through this project and share today with you. So before we go deeper into this presentation, since we have so many countries, let me just take a look again. Bosnia and Herzegovina, somebody from Washington, D.C., Kenya, Montenegro, India, Bogota, Texas. Oh my gosh, so awesome. So you guys are representing the whole planet. So I definitely don't have experience with our planet as much as this group as a whole, but I've been to a few places where I experienced some types of urban agriculture that I wanted to share with you before we really start this presentation. So when I went to Mexico City and I visited this organization, Center for Environmental Education and Information, they go to a number of urban schools which previously have never had green spaces, and they establish urban gardens, school gardens, and they also develop curricula which teachers from different subjects can use. So for example, surprisingly, teachers of English, for example, they can take whole classes and learn new words, verbs, and language in the garden using the plants. When I went to Taipei, Taiwan, I visited the first eco school in this country, and they have an amazing school garden with so many purposes and activities, anything from rainwater collection to water purification to composting systems and butterfly gardens, which help them to to keep accreditation as an eco school and keep their wonderful eco school flag. In Rio de Janeiro, I've visited a totally different example of urban agriculture education. So on this picture, you will see students from a local university. They come to one of favelas, and you know, favelas in Brazil are some of the poorest neighborhoods. And so these university students, they grow plants, potted plants, and also hydroponics to inspire younger elementary school students, inspire interest in learning about science. This is such a wonderful project. A totally different example I found in Seattle, where in this community garden that was established by Chinese immigrants, they grow plants that you cannot find in grocery stores. And if you are a Chinese immigrant who would like to maintain your cooking traditions and cook something that your grandparents cooked and you cannot find this vegetable in the store, you can grow it here. You can also invite children and other members of your community to participate in this garden, learn about culture, reconnect with other cultures, and build a better, more trust within your community. About 5 years ago, this picture I took in New York, the Bronx, New York. And this is from a high school where a hydroponic system has been installed, and high school students not only grow plants, but they also bring them to the school kitchen, school cafe, and they use these plants to cook and feed good meals for their peers. This picture, another picture that I took in so-called Science Barge, which is now in Yonkers, New York. Basically, this science barge is an educational facility that has all kinds of contemporary, like modern technologies, anything from solar panels to hydroponics to water purification systems and wind energy that they show to the students and inspire their interest in science as well as healthy eating and healthy habits. So you see there's very different very different types of urban agriculture and how it meets and merges with educational systems. I think it's time for us to go to the central part of this presentation, and we will begin with the definition of what is urban agriculture and urban agriculture education outcomes. And then later, we will look at one specific outcome, which is civic participation. So we will look at one of the frameworks for civic participation, and then we will review our current research on civic participation as an outcome of urban agriculture education in New York City, as well as what literature and publications say about civic participation in urban agriculture education. All right, so what is urban agriculture? There's so many definitions, and I've tried to put, instead of defining it, I decided to give you many examples of different urban agricultural systems. So on this slide, the green circles you will see, these are types of urban agriculture where you grow something. It can be plants, it can be sometimes mushrooms, sometimes it can be even animals such as like chicken eggs, or even oysters. So it's still part of urban agriculture. Some people, however, also include into urban agriculture elements that are not producing food, but they are related to food distribution and consumption, which includes community-supported agriculture, farmers markets, food co-ops, garden to cafe, cooking classes, etc. For the purposes of our research, we don't include this non-productive urban agriculture. We'll look at mostly at the producing part, the green aspects of urban agriculture, of which the most popular parts, at least in the US and New York City, where we conduct this research, are school gardens, #1 here, and #7 here, community gardens. However, we also see a growing number of urban farms and indoor classroom systems that use hydroponic systems as well. So it's growing in numbers as well. So in general, urban agriculture education, we call it like any educational and learning activities that are embedded in all these various types of urban agriculture. It can be curriculum that's designed about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math that's integrated with urban ag. Can be after school programs, summer youth employment programs, or cooking demonstrations, and dozens of other types of where urban agriculture needs education. And as many types of urban agriculture education exist, maybe there's as many, if not no more, types of outcomes that urban agriculture and urban agriculture education can produce. On the left on this diagram, and this again, I could draw you maybe many diagrams, and you could draw many more diagrams that represents different outcomes. On the left, you can see that urban agriculture can result in fresh produce that you can give to urban communities. On the right, environmental outcomes, such as you can build more resilient systems, mitigate climate change, etc. And in the center top, you will see one social aspect of the, one type of social impacts of urban agriculture and urban agriculture education, specifically on students and youth. We use the framework of positive youth development, which itself contains many other outcomes. For example, we can expect that students who are part of, who participate in urban agriculture education, they can be, they increase their self-efficacy, which is believing in themselves that they're capable members of communities to make positive changes in their communities. We can also talk about, for example, science literacy or environmental literacy, where we can expect that students who participate in urban ag will make better dietary choices, or improve their, maybe receive some job training. Many of these outcomes may be contributing to a larger outcome which we are interested, which is creating more civically engaged citizens. So we hypothesize that students who participate in urban agriculture education, they will deal with solving different social and environmental issues, and at the end they will be interested, they will be capable to solve even more questions related to urban agriculture, but maybe also other social and environmental issues in their communities. That's why on top you will see in this pink a very desired outcome, civically engaged citizens. And of course, also by way of participating in urban agriculture, we can expect that we will grow or nurture next generation of urban farmers as well. So these outcomes are kind of hypothetical, and we wanted to see what outcomes actual urban agriculture educators in New York City are mentioning, or what outcomes they desire, they want, around which outcomes they are designing their urban agriculture programs. So we've got this grant, a 3-year grant, to work to answer this question. And we've recently started it. We have already interviewed a few educators from NGOs, teachers from elementary and high schools in New York City, and most of them mentioned 4 types of desired outcomes of their urban agriculture education programs. Many of them would like students to learn about science, connect to nature, improve students' health, mental and physical. And interestingly, most of these educators, although they rarely articulate or call it civic participation, but they indicate that they are interested to make their students more active members of their communities. So before we talk about this last outcome, civic participation, we need to understand what is the framework of civic participation. And literature offers a few frameworks, and we liked this one because it has been one of the most cited and people refer to this, so it's easy to discuss this framework with many other researchers. And second, we found it very reflective of what's going on in the communities. So Ekman and Amna, they published this paper that classifies different types of civic participation, and they include social involvement, which means you're developing an identity or attention, or sort of attention to different social and issues in your communities. And also there's another type of civic participation is civic engagement, where you are making tangible actions to solve them. Both social involvement and civic engagement have 2 levels, individual forms and collective forms. Like individual social involvement, for example, you perceive that politics are important, or you take interest in some societal issues. On individual level, you can civically engage. For example, you can write a letter to newspaper editors or politicians, or donate money to some charity. Collective forms will really love them because I think they can be exercised in urban agriculture education. Social involvement is you examples can be you become a member of some interest groups or clubs, maybe some agricultural clubs. And collective form of civic engagement, you are actually doing something along with other community members collectively. Maybe you will create a new community garden. Maybe you will advocate for more and create more green spaces in your city. And I actually put together just, again, some hypothetical examples of both social involvement and civic engagement, individual and collective forms related to urban agriculture education. For example, if you take a look at civic engagement and collective forms of civic engagement, again, I think I've mentioned some of them. You can volunteer in urban agriculture organizations and gardens, and by doing so, you will contribute to solving some local social and environmental problems. And you do it collectively with other members of the community. So now it's probably time for us to look at some examples in New York City. Again, this is a preliminary study, but by conversation with probably a little bit more than 10 educators in New York City, we found that they are doing extraordinary work on involving their students in some interesting community civic participation activities. And I've listed here some of them on the left in this list. I probably will not go through all of them, but for example, students are growing their foods in hydroponic systems or in gardens, and there's a lot of this food actually sometimes, and they donate it to soup kitchens, those organizations that distribute free food to those people in need. They also go and donate some of this food to retirement and nursing homes. And there have been some interesting stories where when they visit those retirement homes, there's like intergenerational learning when young students meet older generation people, and they understand each other's needs. They understand they are all members of this community. And so this is probably the only chance for them to meet each other and interact. Then let's see, maybe selling produce in farmers markets. That was at number 4. That's another interesting example. So some schools open their grounds to create temporarily farmers markets where students will sell some of this produce to local communities. And remember, even in New York, we call many communities food deserts, which means that the members of these communities have hard time to find healthy food because it's just not available at local grocery stores. So students are trying to address this food desert and obesity and unhealthy eating habits problems by distributing this food, either donating or selling it to local community members. And it opens a ground for like conversation and connection with communities. Let's see a little bit more in-depth examples. So this picture, these pictures that I took 2 months ago before the COVID outbreak, when I could actually visit some of the schools. Now I will be conducting this research mostly through Zoom. But nevertheless, when I went to one of the schools in the South Bronx, I just noticed that most of schools in the Bronx in New York City, they kind of look like fortress. So it's like a box, community members don't know what's going inside. Parents don't have a say about what students are learning in schools, and it's just like, yeah, just a fortress. However, on the perimeter of the school, there's a miracle. There's this garden which offers like a window, like a link, a connection between community members and schools, because community members can pass by and glance what students are growing. Sometimes school grounds is opening and community members come in and work alongside with students. And sometimes another school will come here, like this is a high school, and maybe an nearby elementary school doesn't have a garden, and their kids can come and communicate with older students here. So yeah, school gardens are nurturing this school community link. which is much needed. Another link that school gardens can create is, at least in New York City, there is a number of NGOs and other types of organizations that provide all kinds of resources for schools to build these gardens, to develop curriculum and develop more connections with the communities. They donate greenhouses, donate money to establish raised beds, and foster other connections. So urban agriculture as a way to build connections between schools and NGOs and the larger civil society around schools. Sometimes schools don't have their own soil or grounds for gardens, so they may either use community gardens as their school garden. In this case, students always or often meet other community members, and there's a lot of intergenerational learning and cultural learning. And this is just an example of a high-tech agriculture where I've just mentioned a couple of minutes ago that modern hydroponic system, they can really help you grow a lot of food that classroom students cannot consume. So they bring this produce to their families or sell it to communities or donate to soup kitchens and those who are in need. So while we do this empirical study, we also would like to see what's going on in terms of discussion of civic participation as an outcome of urban agriculture education in literature. And since we're in our research group is in the US, we've been interested in US-based publications. So Maggie, my collaborator on this project, will present a little bit more about this.
Hello, everyone. So as Alex said, we are conducting a scoping review of a lot of the literature related to civic engagement and civic participation. And a scoping review is much like a systematic literature review, except we're just looking at the literature that exists, but what specifically is published out in the field about civic engagement. So we found that there's a very limited scope of papers that fit our criteria. And our criteria being something that involved urban agriculture, something that involved high school students, and something that involved civic participation of some sort. But we ended up finding 11 papers, and there was a surprising diversity of examples that we found in just these 11 papers. So there's so many different setups that people can implement into their schools to foster this type of civic participation that we're looking at. We found things like urban farm networks. We found food justice nonprofits. We found summer farming internships. And then we found people that have just implemented environmental curriculum. So there's a huge diversity of programs that we found. But then when we're looking at our civic participation here, we've divided it into two main groups. We found, as Ekman and Amna published, we found social involvement, where people are directing their attention to environmental issues. So people are developing social capital. They're wanting to pursue environmental interests. And then there's also civic engagement, where they're actually acting with these environmental beliefs. They're advocates, they're opening farm stands, they're doing something in their communities that really make a difference from these programs.
Thank you, Maggie. I would like to wrap up this presentation, which since we've learned, we just started learning about civic participation as an outcome based on our literature review and our empirical study. And but we already have some. I want to leave you with two messages. One message is we would like to think about what types of outcomes, or when you can measure, what kind of impacts you make within and outside your program, and when you can measure them. So maybe Maggie can just comment on this.
Sure. So currently we're hypothesizing that there's three main categories of impacts that teachers can have on their students. One of them being things that they foster within their programs. There's civic participation that can be manifested through the programs that people are putting into their schools. You can start a community garden with your students, and you can lead them to donate the food to a food bank, for example. And then there's another group where students are taking the initiative and having these impacts on their own. So if you foster environmental attitudes and really good environmental values in your students, then they might be able to do things that can affect the community on their own outside of the program. And then the third impact is over the long term. One of the studies that we were looking at analyzed what people were doing for careers after 5 to 10 years following these programs. And then there was an increased incidence of people getting involved in environmental advocacy. So these programs can have a very long-term effect as well as these short-term effects, and that's a really key takeaway.
Thank you. So, and just a couple of concluding thoughts about what urban agriculture, education, civic participation can have, what implications are for the larger educational systems and cities. So we think that impacts, it's important to think about impacts of urban agriculture education, not only on students, not only on kids, but urban residents as well, and institutions. We involve so many people and so many types of organizations together. And so that would be interesting idea to research in the future. Also, another aspect is we hopefully our research will have impact, or at least start make some educators think how to integrate urban agriculture closer with their school curriculum and connect it with their STEM education. We also think that this research and future publications on this research in this area will help us involve all people who live in around these schools in educating students. So not only schools and urban agriculture educators are responsible to involve students in civic participation, think about issues of healthy eating, mental and physical health and obesity and school resilience, but urban agriculture can help involve parents, other community members, and NGOs to work together on these issues and educating students. And finally, we hope that urban agriculture education can strengthen civil society in general, because when people come together and work on these environmental and social issues related to urban agriculture education, then they can work together on articulating more clearly these problems and identifying ways how to work together to solve them through education and through urban agriculture. I would like to thank everybody who been listening to this presentation. And I also see there's a question, will these slides will be shared? We will share the actual PowerPoint on our research website, which is listed here on this last slide. And I think that Gosia said that the whole presentation will be, the recorded presentation will be posted on the Foundation for Environmental Education website. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone.